Okay, welcome to Thinking Beyond. Before we get started for tonight's presentation, I just want to let everybody know that our next Thinking Beyond and the last webinar of 2024 is November 25th, and it's with Tamara Davis. And the title of her presentation is New Light on Dark Energy, The Mystery Deepens. So registration links will be open for that in the next couple of weeks, and I'll send those out over social media and email. And for tonight's webinar, if you have any questions at any time during the presentation, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those towards the end of the hour. And I think that's all I've got, so I will turn it over to the director of the Beyond Center, Paul Davies, who will be moderating tonight.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Roland Fletcher. He has the wonderful title of Professor of Theoretical and World Archaeology. He works at the University of Sydney.
Morally inclusive.
He's well known for his book, The Limits of Settlement Growth, and he's an expert on Angkor in Southeast Asia. He's well known for that, but also for introducing something called the interaction communication model. I wish I knew more about it, but I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to Roland to explain what all that is about and fit it into the broader picture of the evolution of intelligent life on Earth and beyond. So over to you, Roland.
Thank you very much. First of all, I've taken Paul as his word about thinking beyond. I'm moving beyond my own field of expertise and moving out into a very large issue of the universe and intelligence. My screen, here we go. First of all, I have a whole lot of people to thank. I'm not going to go through them. That's just so that you can read them at your leisure at some other point in time. There are a couple of basic opinions that I want to make clear. I'm not arguing about them or debating them. I am of the view that life is distributed across the universe, and I am of the view that because of that, intelligence is also distributed across the universe. What I would particularly like to acknowledge is a paper by Nathalie Cabral in 2016, where she emphasized to SETI that the SETI researchers needed to pay attention to a plurality of intelligence. It leads to a very interesting consequence that one must then ask very particularly, what are the behavioral characteristics of a particular kind of intelligence? And the one I'm looking at is the one we happily are most familiar with, which is ourselves. And the point I want to make, and the reason for thinking beyond in this talk, is that where we get to is something very surprising. It suggests that our way of understanding intelligence in the universe may need to be rather different from the pattern we've tended to use. And this is the core of the talk. This is a plot over the last 50,000 years of the surface area of settlements, ranging from very small hunter-gatherer camps 50,000 years ago through to the low-density megalopoli and desiccata of the world at the present day. What it shows very clearly is what we all know, is that cultural change is accelerating. What this does, and it turns out to be an unusual quality, is that the size of settlements is an absolute index of this acceleration, because it encapsulates everything that is enabling a settlement to operate. So what you're seeing here is an index for the whole of the planet for 50,000 years of the rate at which cultural behavioral change is occurring. And essentially, it's gone exponential, and it's now moving to be hyperbolic. And it's the implications of that that I want to follow up, because what it suggests is that our future is not going to be at all what our past has been. And archaeologists are quite used to this condition, that the past is not what the future will be. But we tend not to get on top of it too vigorously, and I want to get on top of it very vigorously. So the core issues are, what does this degree of acceleration mean for the nature of our future? And particularly, what does it mean for the future behavior of a terrestrial, social, intelligent life form? That's the only type of intelligent life form that I'm discussing. And essentially what I want to argue is a series of logical propositions which would specify that we are not unique or unusual in this particular way we behave. We're unique. Our physical system is unique. The particular things we do are unique. My argument is that the boundary conditions of what we do are not. And what that would lead to is the implication that anywhere in the universe, a terrestrial, social, intelligent life form that engages with the material like we do will actually end up creating the same kind of pattern of change of behavior as we are producing. So what is going on within that great curve that you see is accelerating, punctuated rates of change. And I'm going to be describing that. It's a little strange because I'll be talking quite a lot about settlements and cities, and then I'll start talking about the universe. The basis of this, and in part my respects to Sara for her book, where her proposition about studying phenomena in terms of the assembly that makes them has been a very useful clarifier for an argument I've been making for some time. The point I want to make about intelligent life on this planet is that the characteristics which make up our form of intelligent life are widely distributed among other life forms on this planet. And the obvious instance is the degree to which we use materiality. We are not at all unique on this planet as an animal in using materiality. It was being used in a very durable form, durable enough that you can still see them today in the nests of myosaurs 77 million years ago. And when you come up to the present day, there are all sorts of tool users and tool makers among the animal populations of the planet. We are not unique in this characteristic. Now, the particularly interesting thing about this behavior, and most particularly about it in our nearest biological neighbors, the chimpanzees, is that they are both tool users and tool makers, and they actually use stone. They make chunks of stone to do a job. The really interesting difference between the chimpanzees and us is that the chimpanzees only carry out this practice on work sites where they're processing food. The great difference with us is that we were splendidly, and always have been, a very dirty animal. We produce lots of mess. And the key thing is we produce lots of mess on our occupation sites. And the key thing about our occupation sites, as I'll show you shortly, is that they're scatters of junk. They're scatters of smashed bone, smashed stone. And of course, that signal is very durable. So first of all, to introduce where we have been and where we are, this is one of my favorite images in the Aarhus Museum in Muscat. That's an image of Lucy, one of our ancestors 3 to 4 million years ago, and me as a comparative scale. Now, the thing to bear in mind is that that little character is a hard case. She's a tough case. And those hands are crucial because those hands can pick up a piece of rock. You have to bear in mind that she lives in a world where the hyenas are taller than she is. So if you can heft a chunk of rock, you have a very powerful survival capacity, but you have greatly complicated your life. And this is what I want to illustrate. This is an illustration of it. This is a kind of weird thing that archaeologists do. They excavate the rubbish of other people's settlements, even when they're 3 to 4 million years old. The point about this image is that all that flat surface within those excavations is a scatter of bone and stone. And we tend not to think very much about that, but of course it's important to archaeologists or they wouldn't know what these beings were doing. But the point to notice about it from your point of view is that that signal is still there. That locational signal was laid down more than 3 million years ago, and it's still visible. What is so serious about this is that what this means is that an inherently intelligent life form, if it starts using durable material on its occupation sites, does something devastating. It starts to create a cultural landscape, an extended cultural landscape. And the reason why this is so serious is that what it means is that if you, as an early hominin, go into another valley and you see a scatter of stone tools on the ground, and you can recognize that they're not yours, you know something very important. You know that there is another group of hominins in that valley, and they don't know that you are there. You have gained a profoundly important piece of information. And the reason why, in my view, that is so significant is that that locks human beings inextricably into an intensely competitive selection mechanism, where there is preferential selection for those hominins whose brains can store and manage and temporarily arrange the information that is on those occupation sites. In my view, what we see is that once you have a potentially intelligent life form that's social and active on a terrestrial surface, if it's using materiality, it has trapped itself into a milieu in which there is rapid preferential selection for larger and larger brains. I'm wondering, and I must talk to my colleagues who work on the cetaceans about this, whether in fact this is the same issue that arises with the cetaceans, is that they're trapped into an environment of incompressible water with a history of spatial signals in it. And they have to process immense quantities of old signals and new signals and sort out how it works. But this is the phenomenon on land. What this leads to is that if you get a terrestrial social animal which is using material in its occupation sites, you will get the move to the rare big-brained intelligence which we have. I think Charlie Lineweaver is perfectly correct that there isn't an inevitable trend towards big-brained intelligence. I'm not sure that it is per se all that useful, but I think we are trapped into it by our evolution. What it does, of course, is it leads us to be really quite an impressive animal. So by 15 to 20,000 years ago, we're building huts in what is now Ukraine out of hundreds of pieces of mammoth bone. And what we're doing is we're collecting those V-shaped things are the lower jaws of mammoth. They're collecting hundreds of them from the riverbeds and locking them together. They're building a kind of bone Lego to create structures. This is how rapidly and elaborately these brains have developed. And what this is part of in Meserich is an encampment of 6 of these structures. So you get an area or an occupation area, and that's where you get one of those sizes, the total area of that patch with those huts on it, which is on that diagram which you saw earlier. Now, why does this all matter? Because it then lands us in a very important situation. Because there are 2 boundary conditions on the behavior of a group living together on a patch of ground. And the 2 boundary conditions are, first of all, that we have a finite capacity to tolerate interaction. There is a limit to the amount of signal input that we can tolerate. And that turns into essentially an upper density limit on the degree to which we can compact ourselves into occupation space. And the other is that there is a finite capacity to how far we can transmit information with a given energy base. If I'm just speaking, I could only speak to you probably across a third of the building that I'm in. With the enhancement of energy, I can speak to you anywhere in the world. What is crucial about this is that those 2 characteristics, an interaction limit, which is a function of the finiteness of the brain, and a communication limit, which is a physical limit to how far you can transmit a signal, are universal. They will be the case on any planet, anywhere in the universe, without exception. No life form that is working in any kind of social relationship can escape those constraints. And what is then crucial about that is that those are inescapable selective pressures on the way we operate. The reason for the materiality is really serious because material will allow you shielding to assist you in your relationships with other people, like the tremendous utility of a door of a bedroom for a teenager. And you can use material to shunt information over distance, either by creating machines or by recording stuff and sending it. So the key point about all this is that once you've got this process of evolution of intelligence going with a being that is using materiality, you then shift into another selection process where these 2 external variables operate to trigger incessant change in the way communities operate. This is what is driving the acceleration of our cultural behavior. What it looks like, I'm not going to go into it in great detail, I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 examples, is that we've gone through a succession of punctuated jumps in the size of settlements on our planet. There was a jump beyond about 1 hectare, starting about 10, 12,000 years ago, beyond 1 square K about 5,000 years ago, and the one we're all familiar with, beyond 100 square K for compact settlements somewhere in the 19th century. Notice that this series of constraints do not apply to low density settlements. That's really important. So what is illustrated here is the difference between the maximum size a compact settlement can have. That's the great Chinese capital city of Chang'an in the bottom left-hand corner, which covered about 90 square K. And Angkor, in the 13th, 14th century in Southeast Asia, which covered nearly 1,000 square K. But it only has 750,000 people in it. Whereas Chang'an had nearly 1 million people in it. This is the contrast. Within that diagram, the front edge is all low-density settlements, and the bulk of the change is occurring further back within the curve. So it actually looks like this. The front edge is low-density settlements jumping to great sizes quite early, but having no future. There is no continuity between the successive kinds of low-density systems. Where the continuity exists is in the great compact settlements of the world. So Rome, for instance, has gone from being villages in the first millennium BC continuously to being a compact industrial city in the modern world. Continuity is all in those blue increases. Now, what I want to do briefly is to describe why this is so serious. Because these successive jumps, what I call transitions, generate each other. This isn't something that runs out and stops. You get a slowdown in the size of a particular kind of settlement, but out of it, you get a jump to a new, much larger settlement form. And I'm going to illustrate that to you now. For a transition to occur, a cultural system has to have a whole assemblage of ways of managing information, which, for instance, we're familiar with early cities from about 5,000 years ago, in terms of conventionally what we call writing, but would also include the quipu, the knotted string system that the Inca used. These are ways of managing information which communities have to have before these big compact settlement size increases can occur. The famous examples with the Industrial Revolution are that the clock and the printing press came into being 400 years or more before the formation of industrial urbanism, and they came into being for purposes totally unrelated to the role that they would eventually play in industrial urbanism. So first of all, let's have a look at an example of a transition beyond 1 square K for urban settlements. And the example I'm going to use is China. Notice, and very important here, that this is to do with compact settlements, not dispersed settlements. So what this schema says is that in here, you have lots and lots of examples of new ways of doing things, which are being thrown up by the system and are recombining in a whole variety of different ways, and eventually combine in such a way that they cause one of these transitions to happen. So what it looks like is this. If you look in China, in the several millennia before the beginning of cities which are using writing, you have numerous sign systems of various sorts. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know what they mean. But there are numerous examples of these scattered all over China. And out of them comes what will eventually be the Chinese writing system. When you plot this all up for all of the categories that are necessary for a compact city to develop, things like calendrics, rectilinearity, durable walling, sign systems, and so on, what you see over the period from 7,000 years ago down to the formation of the Chinese compact cities is the increasing frequency and occurrence of these characteristics which will eventually make up the urban settlements. They are what has to be assembled for the urban system to work. And the key point about them is that they're popping up all over the place. They're doing all sorts of different things. They're combining in all sorts of different ways. This isn't a linear system. This is a generation of pattern and selection occurring on that range of variety. So, for example, if you look at all the features which will eventually manage sight and sound in the later cities, they're scattered all over the place over those preceding millennia, all over China. If you look at the pattern of where all of the prerequisites occur, that's the white blobs, in relation to the cultural complexes which have been identified in China, there's a spread of them all over the place, and they're not in every one of these cultural systems. But the only place that the initial compact urban settlements arise is in here. There's a possible other case down here, but this is the famous Shang dynasty urban formation, the compact urban formation. So what we're seeing is that as a transition begins, there was one at 1 hectare, thousands of years earlier. You have this incessant production of variation and forms and different combinations of doing things, which eventually leads to the next transition. In other words, each transition generates the next. Excuse me, the lights have gone out in my room, but I think you can still see me. Okay. So what happens? Once you get one of those transitions, this is the transition in China, 1800 BC, you get a very rapid increase in the maximum size of settlements, running all the way up to Chang'an, that great Chinese capital city, the biggest walled city of the pre-industrial world, about 90 square K ultimately, which is the biggest walled city form that China ever created. This is where the whole story of these successions, transitions occur. Up here is one of these size limits, a size limit beyond which cities with these forms of communication cannot go. And what the Chinese system did was it actually dropped back from the Chang'an scale. Chang'an demonstrably was too big, and they moved to smaller and then slightly larger capitals, but went nowhere near that previous one. So what you see here is the classic rapid rise and then a level off. This is an inertial period in here. But notice what is going on elsewhere in the world. Elsewhere in the world, in Europe, the same kind of urban base is producing a new pattern of innovation. Up here, between 1 square K and 100 square K, you're getting another batch of these prerequisites occurring. The previous group was down here. This is a new group following the initial urban transition. What does this look like? So it's things like this. The key thing about the clocks and mechanized printing is that they were developed for religious purposes, to manage religious time and to distribute vernacular texts. They were not designed to run industrial systems. They came into being for entirely other purposes. And this is what it looks like. That's the Chinese pattern, and this is the European pattern. Notice that the pattern is distributed all over the world. In here, are clocks. This is clocks occurring in China, briefly in the Song dynasty, and then being abandoned. What happens with London is that it skyrockets on the basis of all the changes which are going on in here, and then exceeds this 100 square K limit at the beginning of the 19th century. This is what it looks like. It goes from this through to this. This is in 1800. This is in 1914. And what you get is this huge transformation, which we're used to now as a habitual form of settlements. The point about this, and the point I want to make very briefly, is that each transition has inherent to it a pattern of change which generates the next transition, which is extremely serious because it means that the process is an ongoing one unless one deliberately stops it. What in effect is happening is that what we would usually expect is that you get a rise and a level off. You get an inertial effect. What is happening in these transitions is that you get a rise and a level off, but inside that leveling off is a whole process of innovation which is coming together piecemeal and creates a new liftoff and creates another increase in size, which in the process is generating another increase in size. The reason why that's consequential for us and consequential for the comment I want to make is that that means that in our cities now, we have been generating, probably for at least a century or more, the characteristics which will eventually be the basis for a future transition. There will be another size change, and in our case, it would be at about 10,000 square K. Now, the key thing to notice is that we can get some idea now, because of that curve, of how rapidly this will occur. Notice that it took 4,000 to 5,000 years to go from 1 square K to 100 square K for a compact settlement. The indication now is it would only take 400 to 500 years to go from the beginning of the 19th century to the next transition. We're halfway through. There's only 200 to 300 years to go before we would hit a 10,000 square K compact transition. Notice that low density cities are way beyond that 10,000 square K already, but they don't play in this sequence. The reason why this is very serious is that when that next transition occurs in 200 to 300 years, it will have a profoundly serious impact because it will be going 1,000 times faster than the preceding transition in the 19th century. In other words, just as the 19th century made the 18th century redundant, so this next transition will make our world redundant. Our mode of operation with metal-based machine technologies will become obsolete. It will become out of date. And the next phenomenon, whatever it is, will be based on something else. Now, that is really serious because we already can see the ancestors of the information management systems that will be used in the future because we've been building them in computing. But what this says is that there isn't a metal-based machine technology future. And if there isn't, that would mean that our machine mechanical intelligence systems are merely the antecedents to some other form of artificial intelligence. And the only other form of artificial intelligence I could think of would be organic. In other words, our computers, you have to think of this as a bit weird, are about the same rank as that clock in Canterbury Cathedral in the 15th century. They're a way stage to something else. The implications of this are extremely serious, because what it would mean is that what actually happens with an intelligent life form is that one path it can follow is to continued acceleration, and that there is no factor in itself which would stop those accelerating transitions. So instead of the concepts that we have tended to have of very long futures for intelligent life forms, raging around the universe, shooting at each other from metal-based machine technologies, that won't happen. What will happen instead is an extraordinary acceleration into much faster ways of moving information. I suspect bandwidth, because we can already move information at the speed of light, and vastly increased capacity to create and to process energy. Those are the two things that make up a transition. If that is the case, if metal-based machine technologies become redundant in the next transition within 200 to 300 years, you have a really serious situation. There are no machine-based metal systems in interstellar space. There are no Dyson spheres. There's no Star Trek, no Foundation and Empire, none of it. There are no Kardashev civilizations. There's a perfectly reasonable index for the amount of energy that you would get at those different scales. But civilizations are much too rudimentary for this game. The implication of this model, starting off looking, for heaven's sake, at the size of cities, is that we're looking at a future of massive acceleration in the rate at which behavioral change is occurring in an intelligent life form. And that we're looking at a future that is profoundly unusual, but, and this is a point I would emphasize, would still be identifiable. I'm an archaeologist. I'm used to the idea that you've got to be able to see stuff. There are a couple of serious implications about it. If you take the reckoning that the number of planets which can produce intelligent life forms is a function of the number of stars which are being produced, what has been happening over the course of the development of this universe is a massive decrease in star production. We're down to 3 to 5% of the remainder of star production. But we know something very important. Only 3 to 5% of star production has produced at least one planet with several fairly intelligent life forms on it. The implication would be that you could, in principle, calculate a minimum number within this galaxy of the number of intelligent life forms that could have evolved, the absolute minimum. The big issue is this: there would have been a lot more of them much earlier. And the key issue with all of them is that each big takeoff is very brief. I don't know where it goes. I don't know what it does, but it's very brief. The amount of time that these transforming intelligent life forms would overlap with each other is very low. And in our universe, where we're at the tag end of the story, it's very low indeed, and it's becoming sparser. I've stripped it down in terms of an overall pattern of the universe and just illustrated the first putative intelligent life forms, starting about 10 million years ago and taking about 4 billion years to evolve, and us. In between here, there are all sorts of other cases in my model. Now, there are 3 futures that could occur. One future is the one that was identified and beautifully named by Hansen in 1998, the Great Filter. Intelligent life forms could blow it. And we are certainly aware that massive changes in transitions, like the one we've just gone through a century ago, could wipe out an intelligent life form. So that is one possibility. The thing you now have to bear in mind is that when we start being able to recognize technosignatures in the universe, we're going to find that they're all very short. And we might at first imagine that that is a signature of extinctions. But on the model I'm arguing, it's not. It is exactly what you would expect in an accelerating rate of change. So we would have to work out very carefully how we identify an extinction condition from a rapid transforming condition. There is a second option. The second option would be that an intelligent life form could look at its pattern of transitions and decide that it doesn't want to do this anymore, that it basically wants to get off this run of incessant transitions, and it could do so. And very interestingly, in 2022, Barrett and Wong, in a paper about the nature of futures, made the proposition, which coincides with the whole discussion, interestingly, in the humanities at the moment, about a move towards basically stabilizing onto a planetary ecology. The idea would be that an intelligent life form would move away from that transformative rate, settle into existence in a planetary system, only in a planetary system, and essentially work on a collaborative ecology model. That will be one possibility. The third one is the one where transformation is extremely fast. The degree of overlap between successive intelligent life forms is very low, and something else follows. Because built into the transitions is no upper limit. If you let it keep going, it will keep going. You will accelerate faster and faster. You will have a greater and greater capacity to shunt more information over larger and larger distances. If you do that, in principle, what we face in the future for intelligent life forms which are terrestrial based is the ability to create inflationary events. We can go to a situation where our descendants could generate an inflationary space-time event because of the acceleration that we will be capable of causing. In effect, what, strangely, a model looking at changes from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists to industrial urban systems has created on this planet is a model that the universe has a selection system which is capable of generating terrestrial intelligent life forms which are capable of creating inflationary space-time events. In other words, Linda's model of universes being created on a bench top. I don't think they will be. I'm sure there's some other way of doing it, but that would be the implication. And at that point, I will stop. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Roland. It's Paul here, reappearing. My video, there we are, switched off. That's a lot to think about. We're running a little short on time, but I would like to ask Sara if she has any comments or thoughts she would like to offer on the many different topics that you've covered. Sara, looks like, yes, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I'm co-managing kiddos. Sorry for going off video for a minute. That was great. I really like the structure of the arguments because I also think a lot about exponential growth of life being related to some larger scale cosmological principles. So I would love to talk with you more about how you're thinking about that.
Thank you.
But there was something that you said very early on that I really didn't understand the structure of the argument, and I got a little fixated on it about the fact that human brains weren't inevitable, but once they were, we were kind of locked in and the scaffolding structure. So I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about what you thought was inevitable and not inevitable in the transition to human-like intelligence, and then what happened after it.
I'm particularly intrigued by the chimpanzees. The chimpanzees are using durable material. They're leaving markers on the landscape, but those markers are not where they are residing. So they're having a separate signal, and they can escape that signal. They can just go away from it. The difference with the hominins, with our ancestors, is that because we're dumping rubbish that is durable where we are located, we are delivering that signal to anybody. And we can't escape that. It isn't that we can somehow cease to be using material. We can't. We couldn't then, we can't now.
Right. So is the argument basically that we're leaving this much longer term memory because of the fact that our culture is now building all of these architectures in our environment?
We did that a long time ago.
Yeah.
The brain that we are using was basically stabilized between 100,000 and about 50 to 70,000 years ago, with the critical addition of art, as we call it, which is actually a method of storing information outside the brain. And that's the great change 70,000 years ago, which takes the evolutionary pressure off the relationship between cranial size of babies and the size of female human beings. There's a very tight association there, which we can't escape. What art does is it allows us to store information outside the brain. We couldn't do that previously. So all the period from 4 million down to about 100,000 years ago is all powering up bigger brains, and brains organized in different ways. And that's what we're seeing, I think, in the Neanderthals and the moderns, is that there's two different ways of organizing the brain. And one of them, the version we use, is the one that's won out. So that's what I meant. We could not escape. There was no point at which that selection pressure would ever come off us. And then once we're there and we're building settlements, we're then locked into this next selective pressure. That's what that was about.
Okay. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's very interesting because it has some very interesting and fundamental parallels to the original life transition and like external.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it'd be really cool to talk about that, but I'll let other people ask their questions now.
Yes, we've got a few questions rolling in, and quite a few from Barbara Temple, one of which you actually answered, Roland, because Barbara is asking about whether, given enough time, other animals on Earth would sort of evolve into the human intelligence niche. But as you pointed out, Charlie Lineweaver and his Planet of the Apes fallacy, so you don't have to buy it, but you do, and I think I do, that there isn't a sort of abstract niche just waiting to be filled. It's just that our type of intelligence happens to have evolved, and that's it. but she's also asking an interesting question about, dogs and wolves, and we've been talking about chimps as well.
Sure.
Can some species learn from others, become smarter by association, I suppose? There's a little bit of this, but it does seem like it's really very limited.
I think it's very limited. I'm a hardline selection evolutionist. The key argument would be that the chimpanzees, for instance, will never transform in the way that we did, because they're not trapped into this selection effect that you've got to know where the spatial stuff is, and you've got to be up to date, and you've got to keep track, because if you don't, you're in trouble. You're missing what's going on around you.
Does prompt me though to ask whether among hominin species they learn from each other. Did humans learn anything from Neanderthals, or the other way around, do you think?
Oh, I think we did very substantially. There's an argument that we, for instance, learned how to make clothing, because the Neanderthals must have been able to make fitted clothing, or they would not have been able to survive.
Right, they went to the powder pieces first.
Yeah.
Yes.
So our sort of shaggy, butt-naked moderns came wandering up out of Africa thinking all nice and sunny, and arrived where it was not quite so warm.
So interesting question now from Jim Benford, picking up on the point that is going to thrill people like myself and like-minded cosmologists about the possibility of advanced civilizations nucleating a bubble or something that would become a new universe. And I myself have written about this, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that if we get sick of this universe, well, maybe we just create another one and decamping it, getting out for good. That's the ultimate in immigration. But of course, if you do extrapolate in the manner you have, and the billions of years that have gone before, then I suppose we have to take seriously the possibility of cosmic scale engineering, not just astro engineering, but cosmic engineering.
Absolutely.
There's an actual question here, which is, does the fine-tuning of our universe, the fact it's so suited for life, argue for it being produced by a prior inflation event? In other words, it's been cooked up. Our universe itself is precisely the product of some advanced cosmic engineering in a preceding phase. Is that speculation too far, or would you be happy to go along with that?
I wouldn't say so, but it's really sticking everybody's neck out a very long way. A couple of points to make. The emphasis on energy capacity is where I was speaking earlier about us, in principle, being able to see intelligent life forms in the universe that are doing this kind of thing, because their energy signature must be clearly visible. And even more significantly, their information transmission signature must be clearly visible, because they must be capable of shunting information in absolutely colossal bandwidths. And that's never something we've been looking for. So there would be two clearly visible physical signatures derived from the arguments I've made about what is happening with the transformation of intelligent life. The follow-on then, and it's a one that I've had some conversation with other colleagues like Geraint Lewis and also with Charlie, is this. I don't think that an intelligent life form can create a new universe that it can go to. I can't see any way that information can be shunted across the inflationary event. However, what it would mean is that the evolution of intelligence as a derivative of life, if intelligence can generate new universes and can generate new universes which are amenable to life, what it means is that life can allow life to go on. It's not our life. We don't get out of this universe. But a new universe would be created in which life could then evolve. That will be the difference, is that in effect, intelligence is the ticket out for life to continue to evolve, which is a pretty drastic argument. But what it would mean quite simply is that just as intelligent life on this planet has created ecologies, it hasn't created ecology, it didn't create the planet, it's just creating ecologies. The same would be the case with a multiverse. Intelligent life didn't create the universes, but it is perfectly capable of creating a universe. And if that's the case, we ought to be able to see that. That should be a pretty serious signature. And that should have been happening over the last 10 billion years. We should be able to see that.
Well, that picks up on one of the other questions, but to be fair to Nicole Williams, who sent a question in advance, let me just put that to you very briefly first. Is it possible for big-brained intelligence to have evolved past detection of any technosignatures throughout the universe? For this intelligence to be capable of mimicking other civilizations' technology, which are lower on the Kardashev scale. So I'm reading that as I've received it. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but
sure,
if you're out there and want to message a clarification, that's fine. But let me put that to you anyway, Roland.
My guess would be, why would they bother? After all, they don't have to bother about anybody else. Their capacities are enormous. The key thing to bear in mind about this is that they're not becoming brainier. They're simply becoming behaviorally more capable. The evolution of our brains in biological terms stopped between 100,000 and 70,000 years ago. And it stopped because materiality made selection on brains redundant. And I don't see any way that that is going to change in the future of the universe. I can see no preferential selection that is going to make us brainier. What would its selection value be? Absolutely nothing. So the interesting issue is, what would these transforming, that's the only way I can describe them, what would these transforming intelligences be doing? What on earth? Well, it's not even what on earth would they be doing. What in the universe would they be doing? But we should be able to see them. We should be able to see the signal they produce. Taking the point Sara made, ask what something does, not why it does it.
We have just time for one more question. I'm going to pick
Sure.
up one by Dakota McCoy, because that connects with something you just said about creating bubble universes and so on. So her question is, do black holes impose a finite restriction on the density of any possible civilization? And she's also saying, thanks for a great talk. And I just want to make the point that in some of these bubble nucleation scenarios where you create another universe, from our universe, it seems like a black hole, which of course eventually evaporates and disconnects the bubble universe from the mother, from our universe.
Indeed.
So I don't know, we've got just a minute or so that we could throw that over to you.
Well, I first encountered the universe formation proposition actually through Lee Smollin's work.
Right.
Before I heard about Linda's work. And it would seem to me that black holes sit there with some very serious piles of energy about which some competent descendant of an intelligent terrestrial life form should be able to do something. But quite what and how we would see it is really the interesting question. I'd also, right at the end, like to put in a bit of a compliment, an honor, to all the people who worked previously, for instance, to try and find Dyson spheres in the universe. I think that was a very honorable effort to try and do that on the basis of the model that we used about essentially a technological universe. I would argue we now have to consider what are the implications of a not mechanical universe in the sense that we've previously thought of. It's very sad. I really don't want Star Trek to disappear, but never mind.
Well, that's good. That picks up that partially answers one of the other questions. The questions come in a curious way, a little bit like your graph. You know, they start
Sure.
off very slowly, and then it all crowds up towards the end, and we simply don't have time to cover anymore. So it just remains for me to thank you very much, Roland. A lot to think about, and
Thank
it's
you.
great how looking back into the past can be a guide to the future. And I hope that our audience has a lot of takeaway messages there. And I hope they will come back for our next Thinking Beyond, the last Monday in November. And the subject is very different then. It's from Sara Davies, also from Australia, completing our semester of Australian presentations. And that will be on the nature of dark energy and some new discoveries there. So very exciting. So
Actually, it's good continuation after ending on.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Got to get the oomph from somewhere. Yeah.
So thanks to you as well, Sara.
And thank you very much.
And it's time to go and have dinner here and probably
Indeed.
lunch for you. Okay.
Thank you for the invitation.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye, Sara.